Right, so this is arrest. The format, as you can see from the top of the page, is exactly the same as stop and search. So in the exam, you're writing about 5 different areas of arrest. As you can see at the top, you've got your 2 relevant Acts of Parliament there. So Police and Criminal Evidence Act, needs filling in there please. And a new one, the Serious Organised Crime and Police Act. So it was mentioned briefly with stop and search, but this is actually inserted something in for arrest. So you need to know it's governed by PACE and SOCPA, Serious Organised Crime and Police Act. So you can see here then that you do need to make sure that you are including all 5 sections of arrest in order to get those top marks, okay? So if we have a look then, we start with section 24 of PACE. So that's a key change there that you can notice, section 24 of PACE, and it's been altered by the Serious Organised Crime and Police Act. So what does it say then? Well, section 24 gives the officers the power to arrest you if they haven't got a warrant, so they don't need a warrant, if you is, has or is about to commit any crime. So is, has, about to commit any offence. Okay. If you want to add a little AO2 comment, just probably over here somewhere, the fact that about to is quite hard to judge sometimes. So even though they're allowed to arrest you if you're about to commit a crime, sometimes it's not pretty clear that you are. So that could be quite subjective. Also, then they need to have reasonable ground. So they've got to have a reasonable ground that you are going to commit a crime, a reasonable ground that you have committed it, or a reasonable ground that you are doing it. Clearly, the are doing is easier to establish, but that you have or going to, they need some form of reasonable grounds there. So that's how you introduce it. So section 24 of PACE stipulates that. Right, if we have a look then at the reasonable grounds bit. So officers do need reasonable grounds, and it's code G this time that provides us with those guidelines. Again, guidelines. So that's a key problem we've got here. So first of all then, the officer must suspect that the arrest is necessary. So the officer must himself feel that needs to occur, but also it's got to be decided objectively under the case of O'Hara. Now O'Hara said exactly the same as what was said by Castorina in Stop and Search. So if you just want to add a note to the side of O'Hara, just saying that if the normal person would arrest, then again the arrest would be deemed necessary. So we're using an objective test for that point, making sure that the average person on the street would also arrest in that situation. Thirdly then, we've got code G, so then we've got the necessity part. The necessity test then is at the side, you can see it here, and it spells out the word nipperkid. If that's going to help you, use it, but it might not. Okay, now in terms of the exam, you need to try and remember quite a few of these, but as long as they are in depth, 5 is probably enough there. So we wouldn't expect you to remember all of nipperkid. Okay, and secondly, don't call it nipperkid, because that's something that it's been brought up with our law department. We've made it, and it's not something that the examiner would be aware of. So they know it as the necessity test, which is the correct name, but we've then tried to get you an acronym to remember it. Okay. So, and then one reason why it'd be necessary to arrest you is if we needed to find your name and address, or obviously if what you'd said was wrong. So if you turn around and said, my name is Donald Duck, it's clear that you are not Donald Duck, right? So they might arrest you to find out your real name. I, prevent injury to the suspect or anybody else, so trying to stop injury occurring. It might be that you're really, really drunk and you're aggressive, so they'll arrest you to stop any injuries. Prevent damage to property. So that can be things like house, car, it can even be smaller amounts of property there. Property is very wide. Prevent an offence against public decency, so making sure you're not going to urinate in public or flash everybody. If you're known for streaking when you're a bit drunk, they might end up arresting you to stop that occurring. Preventing obstruction to the highway, so that's just your roads basically. You're not going to play chicken. We want to make sure that that's not going to occur. We could arrest you if you're at risk of doing it. Protect a child or vulnerable person, so kids obviously, but vulnerable people, so it could be somebody that's really old, it could be somebody that's really young, it could be somebody that's vulnerable in the sense that they've got some form of condition. Doesn't just necessarily have to be that they are young. In order to allow a prompt and effective investigation. Now, this one, if you want to star it, this one's the one that they use the most. So the reason is allowing a prompt and effective investigation. All this means is to speed up the investigation. So they need to take you to the station, arrest you, and interview you. And if they want to interview you, they need to arrest you. So this is the one that they actually use the most. So arguably, even though the necessity test is good, because they do need to meet one of these elements, because this one is really easy to satisfy, because you need to interview everybody really, it can be argued to be slightly unfair. So you need to be thinking about that. It gives the police a bit too much discretion. Final reason to arrest then is to prevent disappearance. So these are reasons that are under the necessity test to make sure that the arrest is necessary. So if the officer doesn't match one of them, then the arrest would be classed as unlawful and they can't do it. Okay, so they've got to match at least one of those elements there for it to be classed as lawful. Okay, your case at the bottom then, G versus DPP, it's just explaining that just because you're well known to the police and you often give fake names when you are arrested doesn't give them a reason to arrest you right there. Okay, that's not fair. So as it says, the fact that the officer knew a defendant frequently gave false names isn't enough just to arrest you. Okay, so just because that person was always giving random daft names whenever they got arrested or even stopped, that's not a reason to arrest you alone. Okay, right, if you turn over, just stretch it enough so that you can read it. Right, so procedure of an arrest. Again, spells out an acronym, but remember not to use the acronym, please. Use it for revision, but don't write TOAST. They have to follow TOAST because they won't have a clue what you're talking about. So first thing, they need to tell you that you're under arrest. So the officer has to say to you, like, Rabina, you are under arrest. They then need to officially caution you. So they need to say, look, you've not got the right to remain silent. Anything you do say will be given in evidence, yada, yada, yada. The normal caution that you've seen probably on the soaps or on the bill when that was on, etc. They need to assign the correct reason. So they need to tell you why they are arresting you. Okay, it's not enough just to arrest you. They've got to explain why. You need to be 100% clear what is happening there. They need to show ID if not in uniform, or if you just want to add to this bit here, if you ask. So if the citizen asks for an ID identification, do it. So just make sure that they don't go and get a fancy dress costume that's a police officer's outfit and you think you're being arrested when you're not. So it's just proving that where they're from. And then finally, take the suspect to the station immediately after the arrest. So they can't go and get other criminals and shove them in back at car. They can't stop off at chip shop. They've got to take you straight to the station. Otherwise, it becomes unlawful. Okay. Christie versus Leachinsky, then, very good case. It's just showing to you that if that procedure isn't followed, it becomes unlawful. So when this guy was being arrested, he asked the officers, why are you arresting me? And the officer says, never mind, you know why you're being arrested, I don't need to tell you. Well, actually you do. You've got to make it clear to the citizen that they're being arrested. Remember, if that person's intoxicated, it's harder for you to make it clear to them. But they've got to be sure that they know they're being arrested because their rights are limited at that point. Okay. Fourth bit of arrest then, any limitations. Now this is actually more or less the same as stop and search. So they can still only use reasonable force to execute the arrest if necessary. So if you just want to add there, when would it be necessary? If you're trying to flee. So if you're trying to run off from being arrested, they're allowed to use reasonable force on you. But as with stop, you need to add a little AO2 comment at the side. What is reasonable? Who knows? Nobody has a clue what reasonable is, so it's subjective to the officer, and unfortunately a lot of the time they may be in the right in that sense. If you complain against them, it's likely that the force was reasonable, unless of broken arms and things like that. It would be reasonable. If searching you, they're only allowed to remove your outer clothing, so exactly the same as stop and search. They're only allowed to take off outer clothing in public. Again, the rest would need to be done at the station to protect your human rights. Okay. Final bit then, like you've done with stop, I'd separate it, because again this is outside of PACE. So if it wants to know the rights of the individual or powers of the police during an arrest under PACE, then you would only do 1, 2, 3, 4. if it just wants the rights of the individual or powers of the police to arrest in general, this is when you would need to talk about these. Okay, now you've actually got 4 options. You don't need all 4. Again, I'd do the same as you've done before, and just remember a couple of them in order to get the marks. Okay, so number 1 then, they can arrest you via summons. So if you've had a summons in the post that tells you you have to go to the magistrate's court for a particular offence, and then you don't, the police can then come and arrest you. So let's just say I've got a summons through the post, I've been speeding too much, so the officers can't deal with it on the road. I've had to go to the magistrate's court instead to be dealt with because even though it's speeding, a severe sort of speeding. I ignore it, I come to work and I still continue driving as normal. They can arrest me for that because I've ignored my summons. Notice it's only for a summary crime, which is why I've chosen driving as an option there, because most driving offences will be classed as summary. Second option, they can arrest you via warrant. This is probably the one you've heard of the most. So like they knock on your door, they show you the warrant that they've got to come in and arrest you. So they can obtain that from the magistrate's court, but it's only for a serious crime. So if they think I've murdered somebody, they'll knock on my door, say, right, Rubina, we've got a warrant, it's got your name on it, it's got your address on it, we're charging you with murder because we think you've murdered whoever it is, we're coming in your house to arrest you now. So you can do the same there. Again, it's not under PACE, it's a separate thing that they have to get from the magistrates. Notice in Atkinson though, if you don't have the correct details, the arrest automatically becomes unlawful. So for me, for instance, I moved house about 7-8 weeks ago now. So if they came to arrest me and it had the wrong details on, let's say it said 96 instead of 99, then technically I can slam the door in the face. They've got no right to do that. So they have to go back to the magistrate's court and get another warrant that would then include the right details. Okay. Third way that we can arrest you then is if you've breached bail. So under the Criminal Justice Public Order Act, separate Act of Parliament, not PACE, if you've breached bail, we can arrest you. All right. And then finally, under common law, breach of the peace. So what this is, it clues in the sentence really, you're breaching the peace. So if you're getting a bit rowdy, you're in a public place, we can actually get you arrested there for breaching the peace. Okay. Right, remember as normal, you've got to be careful with your wording. So if it's asking for police powers, you've got to use your powers words. If it's asking for rights of the individual, you've got to use your rights of the individual words. So you're looking for example, if it's police powers, things like have the power to, etc., able to, yada yada. But if we're looking at things such as rights of the individual, you are looking for they can only. So you're doing exactly the same as what you've done previously, other than the fact that it's on about the rights of the individual or powers of the police during an arrest. Okay, so if, for example, let's just say if I use this one here, other powers. So if it was the powers of the police, I'd turn around and say, right, the police also have the power outside of PACE to arrest via warrant. They will be allowed to get this from the magistrate's court that details the crime that you've done and your name and address. If I was saying that phrase, but as a right of the individual, I would go, right, the police can only arrest via warrant if they have obtained the correct information from the magistrate's court. And if it's not correct, then it would be unlawful. They cannot arrest. So you're changing the way that you're phrasing it. The stuff is exactly the same as always, same content, but it's the way you are phrasing it that changes. Okay? Right, lovely. Right, that's the rest done.